The stories we are following on this Monday evening, lawmakers in South Korea talk about passing bills on North Korea's human rights abuses. Attention is on whether the rival parties will overcome their differences this time around. The gap between Iran and Western powers over Tehran's nuclear program remains. Reports say both sides are positive about extending Monday's deadline. And a new World Bank report warns that it may already be too late to avoid future impacts of climate change. Stay tuned for these and more coming right up. Good evening and welcome to Early Edition at 6. It's the last Monday of November here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Na-hyun Kyung.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. Let's start this Monday at the National Assembly, where lawmakers reviewed bills on improving the human rights situation in North Korea.
Now, this issue has been on lawmakers' minds for years, but partisan differences have always prevented bills from moving forward. Arirang's National Assembly correspondent Kim Young-gil has this report.
The National Assembly is stepping up efforts to pass bills on North Korean human rights in line with recent efforts from the international community. The Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee on Monday began reviewing two bills related to North Korean human rights, one proposed by the ruling Saenuri Party and the other by the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy. The ruling party's bill focuses on documenting violations carried out by Pyongyang and developing plans to improve human rights conditions in the north.
A national archive should be set up separately to deal with storing and keeping record of human rights violations in North Korea.
The main opposition's bill puts an emphasis on supporting the North Korean people through humanitarian aid.
A consultative body would be established within the Unification Ministry to engage in aid project for the North Korean people.
Both parties say they hope to pass the bills by the end of this year. But the two rival parties will first have to resolve their long-standing differences over the issue. A main source of contention is a suggestion from the ruling Saenuri Party that the human rights bill include government assistance to activist groups that fly anti-North Korea leaflets across the border. The main opposition party says if the bill includes any language indicating support for such groups, they will not pass it. The National Assembly has put the revised bills on the human rights issue up for discussion several times since its first proposal back in 2005. Previous plans for the bills on the issue were shelved due to concerns mainly from the opposition party that pursuing such legislation could escalate into Korean tensions. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
A joint railway project involving both Koreas and Russia is about to be kicked off. South Korean officials are now in North Korea to assess a transportation test, which starts from a port in North Korea and ending in a South Korean port. Lee Ji-yoon shows us what this means for all parties involved.
Over 40,000 tons of Russian coal will land on South Korean soil this week. What's so special about that is that the coal will actually travel through North Korea. A group of South Korean officials arrived in the North Korean port of Najin on Monday to oversee a test run scheduled for this Friday. This test run will include delivering the coal from the Russian station of Hasan to Najin on a 54-kilometer railway. Once the coal reaches Najin, it will be shipped on a Chinese bulk carrier to South Korea's southeastern port of Pohang. So what's in it for these three countries as they get ready to mark the first test run of the Najin-Hasan project? Russia sees the new export route as a gateway to opening up its far eastern regions. North Korea is looking to develop the Najin port to not only export resources like coal from Russia and China, but also to move manufactured goods from South Korea and Japan into Asia. For South Korea, the project will cut down shipping costs and promote more trade with other European countries. Experts say the project might also help mend inter-Korea relations and build trust between the two countries. South Korea banned investments in North Korea after the regime torpedoed a South Korean warship in 2010, suspending almost all inter-Korean economic projects. The government, however, has allowed the consortium to indirectly invest by purchasing Russian stakes in the initiative. Lee Jun, Arirang News.
A creative economy center in the southwestern province of Jeollabuk-do celebrated its grand opening today. President Park Geun-hye hopes the center will play a key role in developing Korea's carbon fiber industry. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
For the first time since taking office, President Park Geun-hye visited Jeollabuk-do province on Monday to celebrate the opening of a creative economy center. Park said the center should act to harmonize traditional and new growth engines.
작년에 준공된 효성 공장에서 생산되는 탄소 섬유는 수천 년간 제조업의 기본 소재였던 철을 대체할 미래 산업의 쌀로 주목받고 있습니다.
The Creative Economy Center in Jeollabuk-do province aims to boost the carbon fiber industry as Korea's next growth engine. It's the third center of its kind established under the Park administration's pledge to boost startups. Each local center teams up with one of the country's largest conglomerates to support venture companies in that related industry. The one in Jeollabuk-do province is partnered with Hyosung Group.
특히 전통 문화와 농생명, 탄소 산업의 대도약을 이루기 위해 약한 부분을 보완하는 연결고리가 되어야 합니다.
Hyosung Group and Jeollabuk-do province plan to create a fund of roughly $9 million to foster the country's carbon fiber industry. They will also build a center for startups within Hyosung's carbon fiber factory in the region to promote venture companies. Through that, the center aims to foster 20 startups in the carbon fiber sector into becoming global companies within the next 3 years. The government plans to establish a total of 17 creative economy centers across the country with involvement from conglomerates like Samsung and Hyundai. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, competition to win Korea's $1.3 billion bid on 4 aerial refueling tankers is heating up. Our Son Jung-in looks closer into each of the competitors and the pros and cons of their pitches.
As it stands now, Korea's F-15K fighter jets can operate for a maximum of 30 minutes over Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island and even less over the country's southernmost Yeodo Island. The military is seeking ways to introduce a refueling aircraft system to extend the jet's operation time and generally strengthen its military capability. Boeing's KC-46 is a leading contender in the bidding process. The aerial tanker can carry up to 96 tons of fuel and up to 114 passengers with a cargo capacity of 188 tons. On top of its decent fuel efficiency and cheap operating costs, the aircraft is also fairly compact, which means it's able to land on relatively small airfields.
Really builds on the legacy of the 75 years of experience of the Boeing company with refueling aircraft. It's also interoperable with the U.S. Air Force and all of the coalition forces as well.
The only concern is that its development is expected to be completed in 2017, the same year the Korean Air Force plans to deploy the aerial tankers. Airbus's A330 MRTT, another potential candidate, is already developed and ready to go into operation. The tanker is huge, capable of carrying 260 people, 111 tons of fuel, and 37 tons of cargo, and is still able to conduct a variety of air-to-air refueling missions.
The A330 MRTT is capable of providing more fuel, transporting more passengers, and more payload during the same mission, and that is why we have won every single competition outside the U.S.
However, its applicability and landing is relatively limited due to its bulky size. Another strong challenger is Israel's IAI. It's offering a tanker based on the second-hand civil aircraft for around half the price of its competitors. Seoul is expected to announce the winner of the Defense Acquisition Program deal worth $1.3 billion early next year. 손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Not a good sign here in Korea when the big names start to wipe their brows a little bit. More than half of Korea's largest companies saw their profits tumble in the first 3 quarters of the year. This due largely to the sluggish global economy. Seoul-based market researcher Jaebol.com says the combined operating profits of 55 of the top 100 listed firms on the Kospi stood at roughly $23 billion in the January to September period. That's down almost 30% from the same period last year. This drop has pushed the operating profit of all 100 listed firms together down as well by more than 15% over the same period. Lots of newly married couples these days choose to have just one child or even none at all due to the high financial cost of raising kids in Korea, or just because they'd rather focus on climbing the career ladder. However, this has led to a chronically low birth rate in the nation, and experts are now calling for long-term investment in government policies aimed at reversing that trend. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
There was a time in the not-so-distant past when Korea promoted birth control and encouraged families to have fewer children. In the 1980s, the nation's population topped 40 million, and the government, acting on the fear that overpopulation would take a toll on food and housing supplies, rolled out a one-child campaign. It worked, and now, along with other factors, Korea has one of the lowest birth rates in the world.
Latest figures show that Korea's average fertility rate, which represents the number of children a woman is expected to have during her lifetime, is estimated at 1.3. That's the third lowest among 198 countries and well below the world average of 2.5.
Whether it be the high cost of raising a child or more women choosing their careers over motherhood, a growing number of couples are deciding to hold off on having kids. 29-year-old teacher Park Eun-ju says it's why she isn't a mother yet, even though she's been married for 2 years.
If I have a baby, my life will have to be centered around the child. Also, after becoming a mother, I may not be able to get a good enough job, and this will then lower my overall standard of living.
Park and others like her hope the government will offer more incentives like higher family support allowances and tax breaks to encourage women to give birth. OECD data shows the Korean government's spending to GDP on such benefits is one of the lowest among member nations. Some experts also say Korea's hyper-competitive society could be another factor keeping the fertility rate down.
If the government gives parents assurances that their children will be able to enjoy a standard level of happiness by getting an average education and landing an average job and working diligently, then the birth rate will naturally go up.
The expert added the government will have to invest more money and time into strengthening its child care and welfare policies to build public trust in the measures before it can expect to see the birth rate improve. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Na Hyung-kyung and Daniel Che.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
Over in Vienna, 6 world powers and Iran are finding ways to come to an agreement on Iranian nuclear program before Monday's deadline, but apparently it's not an easy task. Reports say an extended deadline may be on the table as one of the options now. Choi Yoo-sun has our next story.
While the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany make last-ditch efforts to reach an agreement on Iran's nuclear program by November 24th, expectations are that the deadline will be extended. Officials involved in talks in Vienna on Sunday said a second extension was being considered as the two sides were no way near a comprehensive agreement on Tehran curbing its nuclear development in return for the US and the EU lifting sanctions. The 6 powers already postponed the deadline once back in July. The so-called P5+1 and Iran differ significantly on how much of its nuclear program Iran should give up and when the international community should ease sanctions.
We're still quite a long way apart, and there are some very tough and complex issues to deal with, but we're all focused right now on trying to get that deal done.
While a comprehensive deal is unlikely to be realized by Monday, the BBC, citing Iranian sources, said a political agreement of some sort or reference to parameters of a future deal may be announced.
I won't anticipate the results, but we're continuing to work. We have a final deadline for tomorrow night to find an agreement, but it has to be positive and enable us to work for peace.
Amid the uncertainties, Reuters, citing Iranian sources, says Tehran has a plan B that involves turning to Beijing and Moscow, both of which hold veto power at the UN for diplomatic and economic cooperation if no deal is made in Vienna. The feasibility of that plan, however, is being questioned as China faces a slowing economy at home and Russia is facing its own international sanctions for its intervention in Ukraine. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
And shifting back to Asia, China has long been locked in territorial disputes with its neighboring countries in the east as well as South China Sea. And this new finding may trigger an even bigger row with the U.S. once again urging China to stop what it's doing. Connie Lee tells us what the findings are.
Satellite imagery suggests that China is building an artificial island that could be turned into an airfield. According to U.S. military spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Poole, China is working toward building that airfield as part of a vast land reclamation project in the Spratly Islands located in the South China Sea. Now, the location of this island is what's raising concerns. It is being built in waters where Beijing is currently locked in territorial disputes with neighboring countries like the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. The U.S. has long urged China to refrain from provocative acts in the area and has called on China to halt the project. Lieutenant Colonel Poole said the U.S. urges China to stop its land reclamation program, adding that China should engage in diplomatic initiatives to encourage all sides to restrain themselves in these sorts of activities. The satellite images and a report from the defense publication IHS Jane's Defense show that China has been using dredgers for the past 3 months to build the island, which is massive in size. It's about 3,000 meters long and up to 300 meters wide on the reef, which was previously underwater. The report adds that the dredgers are also creating a harbor big enough to dock tankers and other warships. With its latest move, it appears China is asserting its claims in the South China Sea. At an international conference in Beijing over the weekend on new regional security architecture, China's vice foreign minister said that Asian countries bear primary responsibility of their region. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Let's move on to other stories. Global warming, it's a subject of concern that most of us are aware of, yet forget or neglect oftentimes to do our share in tackling the issue. But the alarming findings released by the World Bank hint that we might not have the luxury of choice anymore. Here's our Park Ji-won with the details.
Most glaciers in the Andes will be gone by the year 2080. That's the worst-case scenario painted by the World Bank in its latest climate change report. The report says the world's average temperature could rise by 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century if the world doesn't take appropriate steps to stop global warming. The report, which mostly focuses on Latin America, the Middle East, and North Africa, says glaciers have already significantly retreated in the Andes. It says that if the trend continues, cities around the mountain range could be at risk of flooding and freshwater supplies could start to dry up. The green projection goes on to say that if the average global temperature rises by more than 4 degrees Celsius, sea levels will rise by almost 60 centimeters. This would mean an increased risk of storms and tropical cyclones, especially for low-lying countries and small island states. The report also predicts that in the Middle East and North Africa, warmer average temperatures will threaten already scarce water resources and negatively affect crop yields. The report, drawn up by international experts, called on governments to aggressively tackle their carbon emissions. Developing alternative energies rather than relying on fossil fuels and boosting the energy efficiency of buildings and public transport are also part of the World Bank's recommendations to delay a climate catastrophe. 박지원, Arirang News.
What we do well here in Korea is listen, react, and respond quickly. Starting next year, South Korea will provide $1 million annually to a joint cooperation fund with Pacific Island countries in a bid to battle climate change. That's one of the pledges made at the Korea-Pacific Islands Foreign Ministers meeting held in Seoul today. The talks, the second of their kind, were focused on development cooperation, climate change, and maritime issues. The Cooperation Fund was set up in 2008 along with 14 island countries, including Fiji, Papua New Guinea. When we used to think of exports, the first thing that springs to mind was manufacturing goods. But nowadays, more emphasis is being given to exporting content.
Well, it's not limited to Hallyu or Korean wave items. People in the education industry say they are seeing more opportunities to go global. Here's our Kwon So-ah with this week's Industry Insight.
The school bell doesn't signal the end of the day for many Korean students. They are out of their classrooms, but private tutors are waiting for them. This nearly $30 billion private education industry has given birth to advanced learning products. And some of them are finding their way overseas. Tintin English publishes storybooks for preschoolers in China and Thailand. The company is taking advantage of the craze for English in Korea that led to a booming English education market. Cheongsang Language School recently signed a contract with major U.S. book distributor IPG, and its products recorded sales of around $20,000 in their first 2 months on Amazon. Experts say assessing the current export volume of educational contents is difficult. But Professor Lee Hyun-chung of Hanyang University estimates it's in the tens of millions of dollars.
Korea already has a good image as a very strong education country all over the world. Plus, we have a very strong IT techniques, so IT-based kind of learning package and the teaching package and the content development really attractive to foreign countries. That's combine these two, we can have easily have a second K wave, it's so-called the educational wave, I think.
Take Cheongdam Learning, for example. Its tablet PC-based program Loud Class makes the class more interactive as page synchronization and its real-time response system let the teacher and students share notes and communicate with each other easily. The platform also allows instructors to adjust contents to meet changing needs in the class.
Hi, Linda. Good to see you.
There's a lot of countries or school districts that have tablets, but they don't know how to use tablets. It's like having a car without an engine. It looks great, but that's the only factor that goes in. So we're creating this engine that helps students, it helps the teachers, it helps the parents.
And the company is exporting the platform. In Thailand, Cheongdam kicked off a Loud Class pilot program this week.
I think that Korean is the best in terms of the way that you teach, and we think that having more and more experiences from outside that would benefit to our students.
The president of IPST added that Thailand should especially be benchmarking Korea's math and sciences curricula. Industry observers note that Korean firms must fully understand the needs of their target markets and localize their content to further promote their exports. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
And now the weather. We now turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center for more.
Well, it's been a rainy day for most of Korea except for us here in Seoul. So when can we expect the rain clouds to clear out, Michelle?
Well, starting tonight in the west coastal region, most of the rain elsewhere should be eased by tomorrow morning, except in the east of the peninsula, which will have to deal with some showers until tomorrow afternoon. And until then, we are expecting about 20 to 60 millimeters in the south coastal region, while up to 40 is expected in the rest of the southern regions. Because of the huge drop in temperatures, the mountainous regions of Gangwon province are expecting about 8 centimeters of snow from tonight until tomorrow morning. Now, looking ahead to this week's forecast, more rain is on the way for Wednesday in Jeollanam province and on Jeju Island. And the entire nation will see some showers on Friday, but until then, we can expect cloudy conditions with lower highs due to the rain. Now to our readings for tomorrow. Seoul will peak at 7 degrees in the morning and reach up to 14 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top to 14 and 15 degrees. And to other regions, Jeju Island peaks to 14 as well, while Dokdo drops down to 10, while Nangkeugang is a bit lower at 8 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for staying with us. If you're tuning in from different time zones, do have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Chan.
And I'm Nai Hyun-kyung, wishing our viewers in Korea a great rest of the evening. Daniel and I will be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.